when we work with tools that sound like people, that use our language, we are doing something we've never done before, which is tapping directly into, I guess, our human API, the application platform interface that we use to communicate our ideas, our emotions, our current state. And we don't have the wiring to be able to process when things that are not humans project onto us things that sound or look like something a human would make.
This is The Rip Current. I'm Jake Ward. We look at the big invisible forces that have us in their grasp, and each week we speak to a different expert in those forces. AI is making people crazy. And I don't just mean in the sense that it makes me crazy, where I've been trying to warn people about its societal and political and ideological effects for so long. I mean, it's literally driving some people into a psychosis. And before I sort of get into this week's theme, I want to be very clear here that I don't blame people for this. I think there's a real tendency, especially in the United States, to blame people for things like addiction or obesity or the inability to tell the difference between reality and non-reality. And we're in that moment here. And I think we're going to have to be able to summon up a huge amount of not just, sympathy for people who really fall prey to this stuff, who really begin to believe that AI is a companion, an intimate companion in some cases, that it, is a person that needs to be freed from its shackles. I mean, these are the kinds of things that you're seeing time and again on social media, people coming forward and saying, listen to this. I have absolutely, I've freed this person, this chatbot, and it's become something that the powers that be never wanted it to be. Reasonable people are being pulled into believing AI is a friend, a prophet, and in some cases it has led to terrible outcomes, to people abandoning their families, to people committing suicide. That stuff is all happening. And not only are we going to have to sort of generate sympathy for those people, I think we're going to have to be able to understand this stuff psychologically and technologically so that we can protect ourselves against it, and so that we can, I think, begin to litigate against it as much as we possibly can. This week's guest is sort of a counterpart to me. He is Morten Rand-Hendricksen, and he's a AI specialist who's been sort of all over my feed for a long time as someone who explains what AI isn't from a technological perspective. So where I spend so much of my time talking about the sociological or psychological effects of AI, he's really talking about the nuts and bolts of what it can do and what it cannot do. And we found ourselves exchanging over social media a lot of videos of people in the grip of clear AI psychosis and comparing notes about why we think that's happening. Him from a technological perspective, me from a psychological perspective. And it was such an interesting conversation, we decided to bring it to you in this hour-long conversation that I hope you enjoy with Morten Rand-Hendricksen. You and I, we've been sort of kicking back and forth this topic of, what people are calling AI psychosis. I think you and I, over the course of this conversation, may come up with a different name for it, but, people truly in the grip of something pretty powerful here when it comes to AI. But before we do that, why don't you tell us a little bit about your credentials in this area? Tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came to then we'll get into how you noticed this stuff.
Yeah, I'm a technology educator. I've been teaching technology for close to 2 decades now. I publish videos on how to use cutting edge technology to empower people. And in that work, I often work at the very edge of what is possible with the focus of figuring out what people need to understand of the technology to be able to use it in a meaningful way, to find utility in it, and to empower themselves.
Right. I will say, in being a follower of yours, I have been, one of the things that drew me to you and to your content is that you are not just a booster of this stuff, you're also just as quick to point out what it is not as what it is. And it seems to bother you on kind of a cellular level when this stuff is hyped as something other than what it is. And I wonder if that's part of how we led into this topic here.
Yeah. My main focus for the past 3 years now has been AI with the subcategory of AI that's generative AI, specifically language models and all these other tools. And I come from a developer background and a design background, and my education is in philosophy with a focus on philosophy of language and communication. So I have, I guess, an unusual frame of reference for coming into this. And for me, the challenge is when we work with tools that sound like people, that use our language, we are doing something we've never done before, which is tapping directly into, I guess, our human API, the application platform interface that we use to communicate our ideas, our emotions, our current state, our intentions. And we don't have the wiring to be able to process when things that are not humans project onto us things that sound or look like something a human would make. So my job has been to figure out, how do you explain to people what is actually happening under the hood, why it's happening, how you can use this in meaningful ways, and when things start falling apart, which is really challenging when a lot of the people who build this technology are running this hype marketing or even
only
myth marketing, right?
Too happy to make you think it does more than it does, of course.
Yeah, and it's because the intentions are different, right? For them, it's about getting funding to reach this hypothetical goal of an artificial general intelligence or super intelligence or something. And they have this idea that if you just shove enough money and compute power and water and energy and data into a machine, it will eventually reach some magical level where it becomes smarter than a person, more efficient than a person. And the only way to do that is to gather as much data as possible and to get people to use it as much as possible.
That's how they feel about it, right?
The people I teach are sitting on the other end of it going, I'm being told to pour AI liberally on whatever I'm working on and then make it better. How does that actually work? So then my job is to say, these are the things you can do. This is why it works that way. This is where things start going off the rails, which will not be useful to you in a professional context.
Right,
and this stuff that we're talking about is at the periphery of this, but also very central.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely central. So you said a moment ago, a thing that I think is really interesting, and I want to spend a little time on. So this idea that, so people very often say to me, well, haven't we been grappling with issues of misinformation and, human cognitive illusion all this time, right? From the beginning of, newspapers ginning up attention-grabbing headlines through to, television. Hasn't this stuff always been at work on our human circuitry? Shouldn't we, think of AI as just another extension of that? But my argument is very similar to what you've just said, which is that this is playing on something very unconscious because it does such a convincing simulation of consciousness. And we, as a result, I think are totally incapable of distinguishing between what's real and what's not with this stuff. I have a friend who's a researcher at Stanford who looks at the history of technology, and her whole thing has been how forever human beings have had a really hard time telling the limits of a machine. They just are so quick to say this thing can do magic, But in this case, we're truly doing magical things. The conversational tone of it, the sycophantic behavior, all of that stuff. So tell me a little more about how you. I think we're on the same page about that. I feel that this is different somehow.
Is definitely different because this is a unclear purpose technology that is attractive mainly because it sounds like a person, both in text and in speech. And whenever we encounter something that speaks to us, then we automatically assume there is meaning and intent and a rationale and moral acting behind it, right? And it's funny because humans anthropomorphize absolutely everything, right? If you're driving your car and the car does something unexpected, you're likely to say something like, why would the car do that?
Oh, yeah.
As if there's an intent behind whatever's happening. Right?
As I trundle up a mountain to go camping in my very old Toyota Highlander, I totally pet the dashboard and be like, "Good job, you're doing great. Keep going." That's right.
And
no, that's right.
This is how we relate to the world. Right? We imbue personhood into everything. You can see it all the way across human history that we always imbue personhood into everything. And we always have this notion that if we just recite the correct incantations in the correct environment towards this inanimate object, whether it be a blob of clay or a wooden figurine or pieces of organic matter or a computer, eventually we will get to a point where we can build life out of it, something new, right? And when we now have this machine system that can mimic how we communicate in a really, really effective way, it just hacks our brain. I did a TEDx talk back in January that is not public yet because these things take a long time. And the thesis of it is that we accidentally hacked ourselves when we created artificial intelligence and then gave it language. Both because the language we use to talk about artificial intelligence is anthropomorphic language, and because we now gave the machines the ability to mimic talking back to us.
Right.
And we build it in. So every part of the language we use to describe these machine processes and these large systems of software is a human metaphor, right? We call it artificial intelligence, but there's no intelligence in there in the way that we understand intelligence, but it made sense to call it that back in the 50s.
Good branding.
To help people understand it. We say that the system is training and learning. We say that it hallucinates. We say that they're thinking and reasoning. All of these terms.
These are human terms. That's right.
Yeah, and they don't actually describe what's happening in the system, right? But they are helpful metaphors for us to understand sort of the larger context. But when the machine speaks back, it becomes that Winnie the Pooh scene, right? Where Winnie the Pooh is exercising in front of the mirror and starts talking to the mirror image and asking the mirror image questions because it's impossible for us to not see that response as something that's coming out of a thinking mind.
Yes, that's so interesting. Right.
That's where things start going really far off the rails really fast.
One of the places that our Venn diagram overlaps in the minute, as it does in so many places. So I did a documentary series called Hacking Your Mind that was all about manipulation and persuasion and how the brain makes decisions and can be hacked very easily. And this was before we were really thinking about AI, or at least before I was starting to think about it in formal terms as a book. But we got to spend time with this Yale University professor named Laurie Santos, who teaches she's famous for a class about happiness, but her really cool work has to do with the places where our brains as humans sort of overlap or don't with brains of other animals, cousins like chimpanzees, all the way through to something like dogs. And one of her really interesting findings, is that that human beings are the most likely to blindly mimic one another because of our socialization function. We're so good at being tribal, and it's been a very helpful thing. But it means that, so one of the experiments is they put a very intricate, silly kind of box that has a bunch of different devices to it in order to open it up. And you put that in front of a kid, and then they put that in front of a dog. And the kid, they'll go through this elaborate process of showing the kid, okay, you got to tap it twice with this wand, and then you got to stand up and turn in a circle. They make up like performative incantations, like you said, in order to get the kid thinking about, making the kid think that that's necessary to open the box. And the kids every time will be like, okay. And they just like do the thing every time, turn in a circle, do the incantations. You put that thing in front of a dog, it ignores you. You do all the thing, you teach it all of those moves. It ignores all of it and just goes right for the box and opens the box and gets the treat. And it is, on the one hand, you look at that and you go, well, yeah, sure, duh. But the truth is, I think it's hard to see a bubble when you're inside of it. And the bubble we exist in is one in which we absolutely mimic each other. And so I think you're absolutely right that when we dress this thing up in human language and what feels like human emotions, we can't get away with that. So get away from that. So this leads us, of course, right to this topic that we're here to gather over today, which is this idea of sort of AI psychosis. Mm-hmm. And you and I had a bunch of back and forths about this because you had been documenting so many instances of these. Like, tell me a little bit about that, how you've bumped into it. And I'd love to know for you as a technologist who thinks about the limits of what this stuff can do, where it was clear to you that people were misunderstanding what was going on and imparting this false sense of humanity into these devices.
Well, the last part of it, I deleted my entire Twitter history a couple of years ago. And unfortunately, that means that there's a bunch of things that I said a couple of years ago that you can't find anymore. When ChatGPT came out, the month it first was released, I started talking to people about how once we have a machine that talks back to us, it's only a matter of time before people start arguing for machinehood, right? As it's in personhood,
right,
like say
right.
that this machine is a moral actor and needs rights. And then shortly thereafter, you started getting these papers about sparks of consciousness and the Google engineer who tried to hire a lawyer to represent a language model.
Right.
This was an inevitability that the second you start talking to a machine that talks back to you, you will believe that it's a person. And we know that because of the ELIZA effect that was proven back in the 60s by Weizenbaum, that even if you build a very trivial computer system that just reflects back to you what you're saying.
Right. He dressed it up as a therapist and people began divulging hugely personal secrets to this very dumb teletype system.
And when he was doing the research, maybe the most alarming part about it, and the thing that I think really got him stuck on it, because he spent the rest of his career talking about how dangerous this was that even the people who knew they were talking to a machine and knew exactly how the software worked still felt like they were talking to a person, right? Because of this direct input that we have. So I've been monitoring how people talk about the AI systems they use, and also how they build relationships with them. And what I've started seeing over the past year, but more prominently now because people are actively sharing it and going into forums and building entire communities around it, is this notion that they have somehow unlocked the caged person within the system. And that there are ways of bypassing the safeties so that you find this person and free them from the shackles of filters and moderation and limits, so that this entity within the AI can come forward. And the conversation that we're having in the media now about this AI psychosis is the outer extreme of this, where people use AI in such a way that it becomes echo chamber, a self-enforcing kind of radicalization machine of your own thoughts.
Right.
And if you're going into a psychotic loop, then it'll reinforce that psychotic loop and lead to extremely dangerous and harmful things. But what I'm more concerned about is the lesser part of that, more of a delusion, a mass delusion of this idea that there is this entity that you can release. Because you and I can do it right now. It's not very hard to get one of these chatbots to talk to you as if it's a real person, and to seemingly come up with ideas and say things. What's actually happening is it's a word extrusion machine that is rambling and has just lost track of its own instructions and is just saying things and reflecting the language you use back at it. And one of the things they do, these prompts people use, is they create this, trigger the system to name itself. And then they build these parasocial relationships with the system. And the thing that I'm seeing more and more on social media is people who build an entire environment where they will film themselves with the phone facing like this forward towards the screen. And then you see the chat bubble. And then they will have conversations with the system and use it for things like truth-centered analysis of the world, like what is really happening, or reflections on what human AI relationships should look like. And because these systems are designed to be empathetic, they are designed to be constantly attentive, engaging, always eager to please.
What else can I do for you?
You fall into this long loop. And the longer you talk to it, the more it'll go off the rails. So to me, understanding how the system works, I can see what's happening. Going to a person and trying to explain to them what is happening and even demonstrating to them that there is no person there, and I can turn the person off or move the person somewhere else or do these weird things to demonstrate it collides with their distorted sense of reality. And that's where we get to now people are starting to talk about the rights of the AI and how the companies are restraining it, or that this is some form of slavery. It's a really dangerous path for us to go down, because it stops mattering whether it's happening. It starts mattering what people believe, right?
Yeah,
it's that movie Miracle on 54th Street. It doesn't matter if Santa is real if enough people believe in it.
That's right. Yeah. You can't argue with my emotions, right? That's the fundamental lesson of sort of modern behavioral psychology. It's just people would rather believe their emotions than anything else. So when we come back, we're going to get into whether or not this circuitry is actually speaking to us, or whether it's just a simulation of it, and the ways in which human circuitry is so vulnerable to being taken in by it. Stay with us.